Welcome, friends and foes, survivors and killers. Let's sit around the campfire together and talk about Dead by Daylight. Specifically, about the newest killer, coming into the game in the portrait of a murder chapter. Carmina Mora, better known as the artist. I can't begin to tell you how excited I was when Behaviour dropped the initial teaser for the artist. It came in the form of a website for the fictional Fresno Memorial Center for Arts and Culture, talking about one C. Mora and her work as an elusive artist in Chile. C. Mora was born in Chile, gaining notoriety during the 1970s after a series of surrealist, radically political murals caught the public's attention. Little is known about Mora, the artist's works mostly disappeared over the years. This brief little bio was enough to get me unreasonably excited about the upcoming new character. I love when DBD isn't afraid to get a bit political to tell a good story, and the idea of a politically involved artist in 1970s Chile seemed super interesting. Not to mention, I love the imagery of crows and corvids, they're my favourite animals, and I wanted to see what we'd get from a killer blending the idea of a politically motivated artist and a crow enthusiast. And my thoughts on what we ended up with are, mixed. Aggressively mixed. For starters, I do love the way she plays, a really innovative form of inbuilt map pressure on top of really good anti-loop and some fantastic perks. In terms of what Carmina's bringing to the game of DBD, I couldn't be more enthusiastic. I also love how she looks, something I'm going to be going into more later. But the only part of her I find myself really disliking is the lore, and I'm sad to say the failing of her story, at least at first glance, are pretty drastic. But before we continue, I'd like to talk to you about Atlas VPN, who provides safe and affordable security while browsing and gaming online. Since the wave of DDoS attacks against Dead by Daylight content creators and streamers, many of us are rightfully concerned about the risks of leaving our IP address vulnerable, and realistically, it could happen to anyone. Fortunately, Atlas VPN is here to help. With a single subscription, you can protect unlimited devices with Atlas VPN, encrypting your browsing data. By hiding your IP address, you can continue to play Dead by Daylight without fear of being hit with a DDoS attack. And with fantastic connection speeds to a huge number of servers across the world, you don't have to worry about tanking your ping to do it. All you have to do to start protecting your online activities is follow my affiliate link in the description. Download the app and start enjoying Atlas VPN's Cyber Month deal. Just in case 86% off for $1.39 a month wasn't enticing enough, signing up can also get you 3 months for free. You can support the channel and protect your online activities at the same time. So why wait? Use my link in the description and start protecting yourself today. Carmina's lore comes across as effectively a giant piece of misery pornography, a conga line of trauma that she's paraded through over the course of a long story. And don't get me wrong, I really do like a tragic origin story for a killer. The plague, the wraith, the twins, the hillbilly, all of these are defined by trauma, tragedy or isolation, and that shapes who they are as people, and they're some of DBD's best stories. But Carmina is quite different from that lot, because all those killers have something in their stories that Carmina isn't allowed to have at basically any point, something that saves their stories from generating into exploitative misery porn. Agency. Carmina's story turns her into an object, a slab of meat with a sad face, whose purpose is to be emotionally and physically tortured by the story that try to wring pathos out of her like a damp towel. It's easily the story's biggest failing. Look at the very start. Her mother leaves and her father blames her for her departure. Not to state the obvious, but that's really sad. Being despised by a parent because they blame you for the loss of the person they love. But the first thing we see of her is when she loses her brother Matthias, and her father blames her again, despite his negligence being the reason Matthias died. Neither Carmina nor the story as a whole challenges her father's narrative. Instead of using Matthias' death as a jumping off point for Carmina to take control of the story and her life away from the shadow of her father, she just gets sadder to the point of attempting suicide. What should be a super poignant moment gets cheapened by how shoddily we arrive there, and how clumsily the emotional beat of Carmina's attempted suicide is resolved. The crows are a commonly maligned part of Carmina's story, because, fun fact for everyone here, crows don't actually live in South America. Admittedly, this is something that we can easily overlook, as crows have been established for years as servants of the entity. So you can logically work under the assumption that the crows represent the entity reaching out to her to keep her alive long enough to become a killer in its service. That being said, I still wish her story had actually addressed this and drawn attention to this fact. There's a little moment of Carmina or somebody else noticing that these are crows that should not be here. I think it could really have worked. But it's not the crows themselves I have a problem with here, it's what they represent. They perfectly showcase why I think Carmina's story suffers from a lack of agency. Because the conscious choice to move on from Matthias and push past her father's projection of guilt is taken away from her. Instead, the crows just sort of save her out of nowhere. It feels like a bit of a cop-out by writers who don't want to do the emotional legwork of allowing Carmina to solve her own problems. There's only one real moment when Carmina actually has any sort of agency of her own, and it comes with the arrival of the VAC label. Sorry, the VAC label. Okay. The VAC label might not be the actual worst part of the story, but it's easily the stupidest part. It's so incredibly on the nose, it isn't even funny. It's like the Mr. Hilter sketch from Monty Python, except behaviour genuinely expects us to take it seriously.
And over here is Mr. Hilter. Good afternoon. Mr. Hilter's standing as a national socialist candidate. He's got wonderful plans for Minehead.
Like what?
Well, for a start, he wants to annex Poland.
Oh.
In any case, Carmina exposing the Black Vale's evil doings in Chile is supposed to be her big moment, the choice that defines her future. After a youth of neglect and guilt when her brother died, it's time for Carmina to choose her own destiny and take a stand against the oppressors. And it flops completely. Because for a story that's extremely long and spares absolutely no literary expense, detailing how miserable and tortured the rest of Carmina's life is, it just kind of glosses over the only part of the story where she finds herself actively choosing to do something. Determined to expose the group's link to corrupt politics, Carmina accepted VAC's commission. The following week, Carmina painted a giant mural on the cemetery's columbarium, displaying the VAC label logo as a surrealist Grim Reaper harvesting the fields of Chilean families. She wore a theatrical dress as she painted, on which she had stitched a poem about political revolution. Fantastic! This is a great start to give Carmina some actual agency in her own story. I can't wait to hear about what illicit activities the Black Vale were up to, who they were paying off to let them get away with it, and its effect on the people around Carmina. You know, details to give it the narrative attention that this pivotal moment in Carmina's life deserves to have. Oh, wait, that's it? That's literally all it says about the big important political mural that was apparently so earth-shatteringly controversial that she got tortured and nearly killed for it? They had the perfect opportunity to make Carmina the revolutionary character she clearly wants to be. But they chickened out, because to make her a revolutionary character, they'd have to actually address what she was revolting against. For anyone who isn't aware, 1970s Chile was a military dictatorship under a regime so vile that its leader is remembered as one of the worst despots in human history. Augusto Pinochet. Pinochet took control of Chile on September 11th, 1973, in an exceptionally bloody military coup that led to a 17-year fascist dictatorship known as the Junta. With the military and the secret police under his control, the former army general ran the country with an iron fist until 1990, when the first election since 1973 saw Patricio Aylwin sworn in as Chile's president. This isn't the first time Dead by Daylight has covered stories set in modern day atrocities. The Wraith story, which we discussed last week, was set only a few years before Pinochet's coup d'etat. And The Doctor and The Clown were both based on real life people and organisations. But with Carmina being an explicitly politically involved character, her story approaches Pinochet's Chile in a very different way to the others. It's impossible to understate the oppressive brutality of the Pinochet regime, to the point that I don't feel like I'd be able to do it justice as someone who's never even been to South America, and wasn't even alive when the regime fell. But today, I'm pleased to say, I won't have to. Thanks to one of my viewers reaching out to me, I had the privilege to speak to Sergio. a former resident of Chile during the Pinochet regime who left the United States in 1987. I understand you've been living in the United States as a fitness instructor since 1987, but before then you lived in Chile.
Yeah.
Would you mind telling us a bit about how you got to the country? Sorry. Would you mind telling us a bit about how you got out of the country and moved to the United States?
Sure, yeah. So it's just a little bit. So I did come to United States in 1987, but I didn't work as a fitness instructor until 2002, 3, when I really, before that, actually, I was in college. And then I studied psychology and I went into counseling a little bit, but then I went back to fitness because that's what I like. And that was in 2002, 2003. Before that, I was at college and I managed a restaurant in California. And how I left the country, well, you know the situation of Chile and until Pinochet left from 1973 until 1990. So the way how I left Chile, so I left Chile in 87, and already people could leave the country on that time, in the 80s, late 80s they were, but most people, they will go to Argentina, Brazil, countries in South America mainly, maybe Europe, I'm not sure. The United States was very hard to get in. Chile wasn't, the United States wasn't giving visas to the Chileans for whatever reason. It was extremely hard. You have to have a good reason. But I'm a martial artist, and the United States Karate Association was trying to promote their organization, Latin America, and Chile was one of the countries. So they have a huge national tournament, and they pick a team to participate in a world tournament in Los Angeles, and I was part of the team. So that's the way how I was able to leave the country and came to the United States. And then when I came here, I decided to stay, just didn't want to go back because there were more opportunities in the United States than in Chile. Mainly was education. It's like in that time, it was extremely hard to go to college there. And that was probably the main reason that I decided to stay, because I saw the opportunity to do my college education here. And that time it was pretty hard in Chile. Yeah. So that's the way how I came here and then how I stay.
As part of my research into this story, I've been looking into DINA, Operation Condor, and the violence against political dissidents under Pinochet.
Yeah.
How did that affect the day-to-day life of you or anybody that you knew? Is it something that the average working man in Chile was aware of or frightened of on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, of course. We all knew that. So when Pinochet took the power, I was 10 years old. That's when he, so I didn't get it when I was a leader. So I remember walking into my parents' living room and everybody was watching the TV and I can see the planes hitting the palace, but I didn't get it because I was playing soccer outside. Came in, he was like, "Oh, what's going on?" It's like, "All right," and I left, right? And later on, that day, people they start talking, and you could hear it. And I still didn't get it. I didn't know what was going on. So it took me a little while. I would say maybe several days a week to grasp to see what happened in the country, because very quick we were restricted. We couldn't go out. We have martial law. We needed to be home by 6 p.m. and then we couldn't leave until 6 a.m. That went for years, all 70s probably. And sometimes we couldn't leave the whole weekend, like on Fridays, we needed to take home at 6 and we couldn't leave until Monday morning at 6 a.m. There had to be a very good reason. If you would be arrested and taken to the military base. And then at least in my town, they will put it in the swimming pool with the water up to here the whole night. And then you will get a fine. And some people got beat up. That was that I hear. I know because I know people that happened to them, from my neighborhood.
The first takeaway I got from my discussion with Sergio is that there's no way Carmina's story could have been authentically apolitical. The 1970s was a time where the average citizen could not afford the luxury of ignoring the political climate. With a junta in place, The government's control over civilian life was absolute. Trying to, essentially, Photoshop out the dictatorship's impact on her life would be an inauthentic portrayal of a Chilean character at that time. So the fact that the story even dares to approach themes of political corruption is both bold and, frankly, the only smart thing they could have done. The problem with this comes with how the political messaging was approached. Like I said earlier, the actual content of the story in terms of its political meaning is pretty thin on the ground. Sure, it says the word political a lot, but the story goes into no detail whatsoever as to what Carmina was fighting against, why or how her art changed things. They didn't entirely Photoshop out the political messaging, but they nearly did with how little attention it's given for something so important. The writing tries to treat it with kid gloves, in an attempt to play it safe and not go too hard into a potentially sensitive topic. But by avoiding the actual political content in a story that's intended to be political, it comes across as too far the other way, like they're trying to brush it off instead of respectfully keep their distance. For a topic as immense as this, playing it safe and trying to stay distant doesn't really work, especially when you take into account the real-life Chilean artist by whom Carmina was directly inspired. Victor Jara was a Chilean singer, actor and theatre director whose folk music was renowned throughout Chile and beyond. He was a socialist aligned with Pinochet's predecessor Salvador Allende, and his work often gravitated towards social and political themes. He supported Allende before and during his election to the presidency, and he became a cultural ambassador for Chile's socialist government. His fame both as a musician and a communist even earned him a concert in Moscow, but that same unashamed political attachment to Allende painted a target on his back when Pinochet took power, and within hours of the bombs hitting the presidential palace, Jara was taken prisoner by Chilean army soldiers. Victor Jara was horribly mutilated by his captors over the 5 days before his death. His hands were smashed up and mangled by the guards, who taunted him by demanding he play the guitar for them, but his spirit remained unbroken. Instead, he sang Venceremos, or We Will Win, the electoral anthem of the late President Allende, and he was still writing even hours before his death. His final poem, Estadio Chile, was written 2 hours before he was shot in the head, scribbled on a notepad and smuggled out of the stadium by another prisoner. There are 5,000 of us here, in this small part of the city. We are 5,000. I wonder how many we are in all, in the cities and in the whole country. How hard it is to sing what I must sing of horror. Horror which I am living, horror which I am dying. To see myself among so much and so many moments of infinity, in which silence and screams are the end of my song. The tale of Victor Jara's death spread like wildfire throughout Chile, and served as one of the major historical landmarks of the early days of the Pinochet regime. Drawing on aspects of his life to inform Carmina's story and character was a really interesting decision that adds an extra layer to her. One that would be hard to appreciate if you weren't familiar with Chilean history or culture around that time. But if you are, well, I'll leave that to Sergio.
So Cameron talked to me about it. I was like, hey, do you know that there is this character from Chile? I said, all right, what is it? And then he read the story to me first, and then I read it. And it was like, wow, that's kind of cool. It's like, and then right away, I sent you a link of Victor Jara. I don't know.
Yes, you did. I've taken a look into it.
So the right away was Victor Jara. Immediately said, this is based on Victor Jara. And this is the reason why. Because when this Victor Jara was arrested in 1973, the same day, within hours that they bombed the palace, actually Victor Jara was going to have a meeting with Allende that day in the University of Chile. And Allende couldn't come because he was being bombed. So when Victor Jara heard the news, he went to the university, and that's where he was arrested. I think the arrest was everybody from the university, and that was incarcerated and then killed a few days later. So I don't know if you know, but when Pinochet took the power, he immediately took all the TV stations that were shut down, all the radio station and newspaper the same day. Everything was shut down. And so there was only one TV station, one radio, and one newspaper. That's it. And all the media, all the information was filtered by those means of communication. So after September 11, 1973, I remember I still was a kid, so I was 10 years old, but people, and I grew up in a neighborhood where everybody knows everybody. We you put the shells out and you talk to the neighbors. In my neighborhood, the house didn't have locks. You just enter anybody's house, it's like nobody got locked. Yeah, because it was like a big family. So after school, everybody came out the street and you talk. That's the way how I grew up. And I remember people talking about Victor Jara. I said, no, they killed him. And what they did, they cut his hands. And then this was like people talking, like, because there is no media, it's just like from town to town, the news moved very quick. And they said they cut his hand and then they asked him to sing, sing now. That was the story I heard when I was 10 years old by my neighbors. And then they said, and then they shot him. So right away, when this character, what's her name again? The character, the
Carmina.
What was it?
Carmina.
Carmina. So when I heard that they cut her tongue, and then they tell the story, that's the same thing that Victor Jara happened to her. It's nothing different. And then, but this is kind of so you get better because. So really then when they interview people that they were, now this is when Pinochet left, right? And they try to investigate and they interview some of the people that they were with Victor Jara on the stereo, with him. And they were at the university first, and then they arrested him, and then they took him. There were two places. One, they put it on the outside of the stadium, most people, but the people that they were more connected, they really want to control. They went under the stadium. And one of his friends from the university, he was with Victor Jara on the bottom, where the lockers were. And he said that saw Victor Jara coming toward him, and he was all beat up, and his hands, they were all beat up. He said it almost looked like just one finger because they were all inflamed and all that. So it's funny because on your story, I think they cut the fingers of the girl.
Yep, they cut her hands off.
Yeah, and they tell him, but then they cut the tongue. So actually they messed up her hand, and then they kind of almost like the two story, the real thing and the fictitious thing, and what I heard, they combined it.
All these shout-outs to Victor Jara as part of Carmina's design represent something quite unique. We've had survivors and killers alike who are based on real people for years. Kate, for example, is our Taylor Swift XP, and I made a video detailing the clown similarities to real-life serial killer John Wayne Gacy. But I think this marks the first time a killer has been positively inspired by a real-life person. Unlike the clown or the doctor, Carmina's story neither demonises her, nor the real-life Victor Jara she's clearly based on. This is why I don't understand a lot of the criticism I hear about her not being evil enough, as she should have been more unforgivably cruel like the clown, the doctor, or the trickster. But artists will always suffer under fascism. A core part of all art is self-expression, and the ability to do so freely is a defining feature of a democracy. To a fascist government, self-expression is the ultimate fear, because with self-expression comes dissidence, and from dissidence comes revolution. That's what Victor Jara represented, all the way up until the day he died. And that's what Carmina Mora was intended to represent too. It's clear that the writers intended for her political activism to be a bigger part of her character, but that approach suffers from what I mentioned before, her lack of agency in her own story. By skimping on the details of her political revolution, and robbing her of the power to do anything else in the story, Carmina's ideologies are erased, intentionally or otherwise, and turn who should be a firebrand local hero ready to stand up for the oppressed into a lifeless ragdoll who exists just to be tortured and mangled, both figuratively by the narrative and literally by the Black Vale. The idea of making a character in homage to Victor Jara was a fantastic one. The problem came in the implementation stage when bringing that character to life. She had to be a victim of a fascist state to some degree, but a key defining feature of a revolutionary like Victor Jara is the constant state of active resistance despite their victimhood. Yes, they can be hurt or even killed, but the emphasis must always be on the defiance of whatever tyranny they fight. That's the big disconnect. Carmina almost never takes up that fight in her story, and when she does, it's given so little attention, you'd be forgiven for forgetting it altogether. But before I get too far into that, I'd like to talk about the one part of her story I unambiguously love, Carmina herself. I'm going to say this now, Carmina is a far better character than her story deserves. I firmly believe the components that make Carmina a truly great character were there from the start and are still there, buried under the issues caused by the writing. And the deeper you look into the actual events of her story, the more you can see those diamonds in the rough, those moments where you actually start to believe the people who made Carmina knew what they were doing. A great example, when you look at the events surrounding her disappearance. After reading the story, Sergio's experience under the Pinochet regime let him see something I didn't. A detail in Carmina's life that rang true to him because, well, it happened to him too.
Camera, I know this story, some of my friends know this story. So something happened to me with the Secret Service when I was 16 years old. So this is reflect everything about the Secret Service. And that time, what time was that? That was 1979, maybe 1979, 1980. So I was about 16 years old. And I'm a martial artist. So, and I was national champion. My best friend was a year older than me. He was my martial instructor actually at the beginning. And then I have another friend that was 19. He was already in college, 20. And he was national champion in kickboxing. We're all champions. And we decide, another friend, his father owned businesses. And he said, hey guys, my dad has this big warehouse. It's empty. Do you guys want to train there? We can use it to train. And I said, let me talk to my best friend and the other guy that I knew. And we said, hey, we have a place to train. Like, do you guys want to do it? All right, let's do it. So we met Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, like from 7 to 9. And we have been training for about 2 weeks when it was like almost 9 p.m. And we hear the gate, like it was a big metal gate. Like this was a big warehouse. Somebody was hitting it. And so we went to see who it was. And there was this guy, he was about 25, 26 years old with a trench coat. And he said, hey, I know Carlos Hernandez. He mentioned a name that I knew that kid because I was a martial art instructor. So I knew the person because he was my student. And he said, oh, I know who he is. Hey, he said, you guys are training here and I want to learn martial art. Can I come in? And I was like, all right, just come in. So we trained, and he liked it. And he said, I like what you guys do. Can I keep training? I'll pay you. And we were all friends. We are not going to charge him. So he said, and we was like, what do you think? He's like, yeah, just come. And he was very awkward. We make fun of him all the time. He didn't know how to do things, We're all really good and he couldn't. And then he trained with us every day, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 2 hours, follow our directions. And about a month and a half into it, maybe 2 months, we finished the training session and he said, he got in front of us and said, hey guys, line up. And he commanded us to line up and change completely. And we already knew, what was going on. Because that demeanor we already have seen from people that work for the government. And he said, and we all follow direction immediately because we knew that we need to follow directions. So we were laughing and we line up and he had the hands on his hip now. He wasn't the shy kid. And he said, I belong to the CNAI, which is the DINA then became the CNAI. That was in 74, 77 maybe, 75. So it was the new DINA. And he said, I belong to the Secret Service. He said, and you were reported as a possible terrorist cell. And so they asked me to come and infiltrate you and see what you guys are doing. And then he said, you guys are fine. Can I keep training with you? I was like, thank you. So if he would have said one wrong thing, within that month and a half, they would have arrested, did a top, try to get information, whatever it was, because I know that happened, because I know they have done that with people that I know, family members. So So that's the way how, like, well, even we knew, it's like, you know, if there was somebody that wasn't your family, you couldn't talk politics, you couldn't do anything, nothing. That's one known every. That's a perfect story to explain how
It really is, yeah.
how, if you think about it, this is interesting because some of the story, her story doesn't make, it's not going to make sense for somebody that didn't live in Chile, I think, because the stuff that they put, whoever did the research pieces, and for me it makes sense because if you think about it, then this organization hired her to paint, right? But what they really weren't doing, they were checking her out, who she was. That was what happened to me. That's what they did to me. Somebody infiltrated me to see who I was. And if I did something, they wouldn't take me. That's just the way to her.
Yeah, that's
It's the same thing. It's nothing different. Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of stunned. I really am stunned by that because
yeah. No, I say, oh, but
I hadn't thought of it that
said, that happened to me. I said, if what she did when she found out what's going on, of course, she painted whatever, you know, the mural that he did to protest. But and they were watching her, but she didn't care. Like for me, I didn't say anything because we all knew we need to take care of our lives. You know, we couldn't die. So I didn't say anything. That's the only thing that, but if I would have been, and I'm kind of a rebel person, you know, because I have done things that other people haven't done, like left my family, came here by myself, you know, like we're 8 siblings. I'm the only one who left the Chile. So I'm out of the box. So, but if I would have said the wrong thing, and I was against Pinochet, of course, and most people were against Pinochet.
Yeah.
If I would have said the wrong thing, what do you think they would have done? They would have taken me in, and I know they would have tortured me because I know some people they were torturing. Some of my classmates, actually, you know, my classmates, they from high school. Yeah, there was a kid from my high school that was 1 year older than me, and he was part of this Secret Service as a young kid, and he was the one like getting information because he told me. So, so I know that. So if I would have said anything in high school, so why they had that kid there, you know, so he was watching too. You didn't even know, you know.
The Black Vale did to Carmina what the Pinochet government did to the people of Chile for years. It covertly tested the loyalty of anyone who was perceived to resist it, and brutally dealt with even the most immaterial resistance. And that's the next thing I want to talk about, the Black Vale's involvement in this story. I personally feel like the Black Vale didn't need to be in this story at all. Their presence here feels forced. I'm not just talking about the stupid VAC label thing. It should be clear by now that behaviour didn't need to make up a villainous organisation for Carmina to be fighting against. The monsters of her story are already there. They're Pinochet and the junta. It'd be like if a movie about World War II tried to replace Hitler with Skeletor. Yeah, they're both bad people, but the change isn't necessary and detracts from the political messaging of the story by diluting the relevance of the historical context. Picking a highly political time and place to tell your story, and then not using that volatile political landscape properly by ham-fisting your own villain in just feels wasteful, almost disrespectfully so. Again, the concept of Carmina being a revolutionary standing up against Pinochet's government, just like Victor Jara, is right there in the subtext. But whoever was writing it didn't have the backbone to follow through on that promise. Something so out of place in an otherwise relatively grounded story weakens the already shaky writing to the point that the ending of the story just leaves a bad taste in your mouth. But, and this is a big but, it didn't have to. Because as it turns out, there was a shadowy cabal of immensely powerful people puppeteering the Pinochet government after all, and anyone with a decent knowledge of 20th century South America might already know who they are. But for those who don't, I'll give you a clue.
So the one thing that when I was talking to Cameron is like, so who was it? Was the secret organization? Who was it? Was it the Secret Service organization, or was the United States? Because you think about when we were in Chile, we never knew that the United States was involved in the taking over the country. I never knew that. I found out that when I moved to the United States and I was living in San Francisco. And that was in I moved in 87. So I think in 89, George Bush Sr. was running for president. And I remember walking in downtown San Francisco and I see a newspaper with the word Chile on it. It was like, wow, what's going on? And he said, we're asking to open I think they said 48 files boxes that explain how George Bush was involved in taking over the country, taking over the country in 1973. And that was like, what? It's like, and when Pinochet will be on TV, right? He would say, we don't want to do anything with the United States. Leave us alone, we do, they come here, he always, the idea that I had that Chile and the United States, they hate each other. That was the idea. And that's the idea that I came. And actually, when I came here, and I asked for political asylum because I'm coming from a dictator. And the attorney that I have, she looked at me and she said, she kind of smiled and she said, I'll file a petition for your, but perhaps we need to find other ways for you to stay in the country because she said, believe it or not, he said the relationship between Chile and the United States are no bad. And I didn't know, but they know. So, and now I still didn't get it. I just didn't get it. It's like, what? I was like lost. Yeah. So here is when I made the connection. It's like I said, you can't understand this if you don't have this background.
Yeah.
Because now I'm thinking, who is the secret organization? For me, it's the CIA in the United States. That's the secret organization is controlling everything. Because in my opinion, it was the CIA pulling the string in Pinochet. So they will give it the order, I think, I might be wrong, I don't know. But that's what I came, and this is like really to my mind, I was like, hold on. I was like, this is like, what's the organization? That was like, well, maybe it's the United States, government doing this, is that really secret organization? Or is it, I don't know, but that's a thought that came to my mind. And this is based in everything, like me never knowing that the United States, well, now everybody knows that the United States organizes, so it's no secret, so I can talk, right? I hope nobody's going to come and get me. That's why I'm still in like thinking in that mode. It's like I can't talk because then somebody's going to get me. Yeah, but that's well known all over the world, so it's no secret. So that's what I can tell you this, but if I wasn't sure, I wouldn't say anything. So the reason I'm saying secret organization because in Chile when I was there, it was a secret. It was a secret, and I, it took me a long time to figure out what it was and then made a connection.
Pretty much every atrocity in South America since World War II can be traced back to the United States government, specifically the CIA, getting involved to defend their own economic or political interests, and the ascendance of the Pinochet regime was no exception. As a Marxist, Allende was strongly opposed to US intervention in Chilean business and politics, and even received a state visit from the then Cuban Prime Minister Fidel Castro in 1971. The right-wing elements in Chile's military, led by General Augusto Pinochet, had the conditions in Chile prepared for them by the CIA to be as favourable as possible for the insurgents, according to declassified documents from September 2000. They destabilised the Chilean economy through sanctions and trade embargoes to the point that public support for the Allende government was at an all-time low by September 1973. And after the coup, the US provided infrastructure and material and informational support to allow the new regime to sustain itself. According to a 2014 article in The Atlantic, CIA agent Jack Devine claims the decision to overthrow Allende was made not by the CIA, but by none other than President Richard Nixon himself. You see why I don't think the Black Vale should have been in this story, right? In light of what we now know to be true, the Black Vale loses all of its legitimacy as a threat in Carmina's story, as it stands in the shadow of the real-life puppet masters of the Pinochet government, the United States of America. If anything, they read better as an allegorical presence meant to represent the United States or the CIA than they are as the entity-worshipping death cult that we saw in the Blight and Twins lore. But again, that allegory didn't need to be there. We know what should be there in their place. There's no need to beat around the bush or tiptoe around the issue. The whole ending of the story reeks of a cop-out. Just like they did before with Carmina's political involvement, they tried to play it safe and insulate their story from those real-life atrocities. But if they really wanted to do that, they shouldn't have set the story there and then in the first place. And it breaks my heart because I know this story could have been something really special. The artist is the perfect example of a fantastically well-researched and imagined character who's great on paper, but has been condemned by shitty writing in such a way that what makes her character shine has been erased. If her story had allowed her to have more agency and more actively resist the oppressive government of her time, I have no doubt she'd be much better received. But the story is too obsessed with graphically torturing her and jerking itself off about the Black Vale to bother following through on the incredible opportunity she represents.
So they were revolutionaries in Chile, and I know that because I know people that fought revolutionaries. They were part of the team that they were fighting this, and the anti-terrorist squad. I know because I grew up with them. The people I think for what I know, the people that they were revolutionary, if they were like a family, that's what I heard. That's what I heard when people talk, that's what they will say. And they will help each other. So it's almost like the crowd will be somebody helping. You are in trouble, come here. They're going to look for you. Stay with us. Let's stay together. And then from there we fight, right? But when they fought, they didn't fight bad people. They fought the government. They fought Pinochet. They fought the military. This character, that's what Carmina was explaining to me, that when she kills people, I think they kill good people, right? Yeah. And that's not revolutionary in Chile. That I never heard that. No, they were, the whole thing was like a very family oriented. They help each other, and then that's what I knew. And they will fight the government. That's what it was. So that part, I don't know, doesn't make sense for me.
That doesn't make sense for me either.
No, and if the character is based in Victor Jara, no way Victor Jara is going to do that, So that seems something that it's just no, that shouldn't be there. That kind of was very surprised when Carmina explained to me. Let's say, explain to me this character. So what is she a witch? What is it? He explained. He said, well, and she said they kill good people. And I said, hold on, doesn't make sense. It can be a revolutionary.
A lot of people have said that Carmina would be better suited to being a survivor. And to some extent I agree. The idea of an activist victim of fascism turning into a killer is kinda strange, but I think there are enough elements of Carmina's lore and design that more or less justify it. The implied justification behind Carmina's existence as a killer is that the crows have effectively overpowered her, and sublimated her mind and will to their own. That's why her animations are so bird-like. She kicks pallets using both legs one at a time, not unlike a bird digging a hole. Her feet have bird talons, making her yet another barefooted female killer for some reason, and her elongated swivelling neck gives her a level of the uncanny valley effect. By relegating most of her bird-like aspects to her animations and sound design, and still leaving her face and body recognisably human, it adds to her eeriness, as we recognise her as very much a person, just an off-puttingly abnormal one. She might look relatively human, but her body language suggests that behind the human face lies a mind more akin to an animal. Her lore backs up my theory. At the very end of her story, the crows swoop in and save Carmina once more, but they're not done after feasting on the corpses of the soldiers. Soon, Carmina's friends find themselves swarmed by the ravenous flock, and Carmina is powerless to prevent it. This is the one part of her story where Carmina losing her agency makes sense. Whether she knew it or not, those crows were servants of the entity from the beginning, and it does not share power. Granted, the realisation that Carmina was trifling with powers beyond her comprehension would have hit much harder if she actually had some agency to lose in the first place, but that's beside the point. In any case, whether or not Carmina's existence as a killer is justified, it doesn't change the fact that, for better or worse, the story of Victor Jara is now an indelible part of Dead by Daylight, because of the character he directly inspired. And is that a good thing? Is Dead by Daylight's reinterpretation of the character and the events surrounding his death a way of immortalising and honouring his memory and what he stood for? Or is the memory of all this still too raw? Is this still too soon to be fictionalising what happened in Chile in 1973? I don't think it's really my place to make that judgment. So again, I decided to ask Sergio what he thought. Do you think they do you think they could have gone harder? Do you think they could have gotten away with naming names or being a bit more precise?
Yeah. Honestly,
or do you think it's still too soon?
Yeah, I think you are right on that one. I think it's too much going because it's hard. It's like very aggressive.
Yeah.
Like these people say it's too horrible. No, it's not, because that happened. It's not horrible. But that's a perfect example when they follow the horror what happened to her, which happened to Victor Jara. And I can tell you a story that I hear all the time what happened to people, there. And these are all really stories because told by the people who saw it. And some family members saw stuff that they were horrible, like having to, they are like friends. No, I will hear it. So I know that happened. There is no question about. So that they made this thing, the hands, like Capitan and all that stuff. It's like, well, that happened, So that make the point that, if they go too hard, it's people are honest, there's no way, because they don't know. They don't have the knowledge, and the experiences and the feelings of, all this history. So I agree with you in that one, and I also think I agree with you in the sense that they say, well, this character is based on Victor Jara, which is well known all the country. I mean, U2 makes songs about him. There's so many, I can't remember exactly. I think Victor Jara is among the 10 I think it's the only Latin American singer. I can't remember the award they have to keep in 10. I can't remember. He's the only one, a Spanish one, that they get very unusual because of his contribution. So I agree. I think if they go as always Victor Jara, some people might go no.
Yeah, it's a hard line to get right, but you want to do it justice without kind of milking it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like these guys say, well, I want to put this character in because we want. I think it's the right thing to do, but we can't go too deep onto it because people are going to. I completely, and that makes sense for me. I can see that. It's just the only thing that is people are going to confuse about the character, unless if you dig into the story of it.
By choosing Victor Jara as the real life inspiration for Carmina, I think it's fair to say Behaviour gave themselves a massive undertaking in trying to do him justice and tell a convincing and sensitive story. And while I think their intentions were noble, their research was exhaustive, and the character they gave us is a pretty great one. The story she was given wasn't written with the conviction, clarity, or direction that it needed to pull a story like this off. Carmina has almost no agency, and feels more like a punching bag than a protagonist. The political climate was largely ignored in favour of a cartoonish villain that didn't need to be there, and most of the nuance and intelligence in the research stage and other areas of her design were erased as a result. And yet despite all these problems, I still think Carmina is a savable character. Because if you strip away all the terrible writing of that story itself, the character actually works very well and can easily be lifted from the wreckage of this story and rewired into another story, written with more care. I cannot wait for the inevitable artist tone we'll be getting at some point in the future, because that would be Behaviour's chance to really get her right and set her back on track to being the revolutionary she was always meant to be. And they can do this by following 3 simple steps. 1. Let Carmina do things. Let her actions and decisions push her story forward. She's meant to be willful and principled. That should be the driving force behind everything that she does and everything that happens to her. 2. Actively address the impact the Pinochet government had on the lives of the everyday Chilean citizen. If she's meant to be revolutionary, give her something meaningful to revolt against. Show us why she cares so much about the people around her. Let that conflict between self-expression and fascism play out. 3. Keep the Black Vale out of it. They distract from the political climate and add nothing to the story whatsoever. This should be easy. Just set the story before the Black Label incident and it should be fine. If behaviour does these 3 things, Carmina Mora can still be a great character. And they've given several characters already massive glow-ups in their tones. I fully believe the artist can be one of those characters. And given how sensitive the topic is, I feel like she needs to be. Because this isn't something that can be left unfinished. Even to this day, the memories of Pinochet's brutality persist in the people of Chile. After his fall from power, Pinochet died in 2006 after 16 years of evading trial for over 300 criminal charges for human rights violations under his premiership. Despite being arrested in 1998, Pinochet wound up under house arrest in Chile after being deemed medically unfit to stand trial. His death marked the end of one of history's worst tyrants, and the fact that he died without ever standing trial for his crimes was his regime's final injustice. By fixing Carmina's story in a tome, behaviour would commemorate not just Victor Jara, but all the victims of the totalitarian regime that claimed his life and fractured a nation. The mistakes made by behaviour in Carmina's story are great, but they are fixable. And when the artist's tome comes around in goodness knows how long, I know I'll be paying very close attention. I'd like to finish this video with another poem, because goodness knows this video hasn't been long enough. This one wasn't by Victor Jara, but by Martin Espada. It's called General Pinochet at the Bookstore, Santiago, Chile, July 2004. The general's limo parked at the corner of San Diego Street, and his bodyguards escorted him to the bookstore, called La Oportunidad, so he could browse for rare works of history. There were no bloody fingerprints left on the pages, no books turned to ash at his touch. He did not track the soil of mass graves on his shoes, nor did his eyes glow red with a demon's heat. Worse. His hands were scrubbed and his eyes were blue, and the dementia that raged in his head like a demon, making the general's trial impossible, had disappeared. Desaparecido, like thousands dead but not dead, as the crowd reminded the general, gathered outside the bookstore to jeer, when he scurried away with his bodyguards, so much smaller in person.
Desde el hondo criso de la patria se levanta el clamor popular, ya se anuncia la nueva alborada, todo Chile comienza a cantar, recordando el soldado valiente, cuyo ejemplo se hiciera inmortal. Enfrentemos primero la muerte, traicionar a la patria más. Venceremos, venceremos, el cadena.